Let's do this thing here. All right. Today, I am joined here with Thays Cunha, joining us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. She is currently leading an early stage AI startup called Assessment Labs that solves a very real world problem, helping organizations including banks, insurtechs, fintechs, hrtechs, and microcredit loan institutions to prevent fraud and reduce default through AI powered integrity risk assessment. By combining neuroscience, applied psychology, statistics, and AI, they identify risk factors that traditional tools will overlook, enabling faster, more accurate decisions about clients and leaders and lenders. All right. Thays, it is a pleasure to have you joining us on the show today. Thank you for being here. I would like to start just with just an example here, right? For anybody who's unfamiliar with a integrity risk assessment here, just to get a sense of how that works and how you help companies here. So let's just say, as an example, I'm a bank and I give out loans to people, and as always, a percentage of people will default on those loans. Maybe some of them maliciously, some of them not. But either way, every time somebody defaults, I'm going to be losing money. And so you then come in and you say that you can help to solve my problem. How do you help me?
I'll just change a little bit your example. And
Okay.
suppose you are a microfinance institution. And the reason I'm using a microfinance instead of a bank to explain to you is because microfinance deals with very low information. The companies or the micro entrepreneurs who are served by microfinance institutions, they do not have standard ways of keeping track of their businesses. They do not have much information or balance sheet or income statements that they can provide to the bank that are audited and that the bank has some source of information. So the tool I created is really useful when we are dealing with low information contexts. So microfinance is a good example because entrepreneurs, they are very informal in the way they run their businesses, and you have very little information. So one of the main informations you'd like to know about the people you are serving is about their character. Because when you are assessing credit worthiness, you have 5 C's: capital, capacity, collateral, another one, and then character. So character, when you know the people you are dealing with, you can assess in a human way who you are dealing with. When you are serving a big population and you have very little ways of knowing who those people are, that's where my tool can help the outliers in terms of risk.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. So outliers, character, what kinds of character traits are you looking for? Like what are red flags?
Well, impulsivity is one, lack of planning, lack of a higher motivation for what they are doing, irresponsibility, traits that lead you to infer there is a bigger pattern behind those behaviors. And that's what I'm looking for. But I'm not looking for that in absolute terms. It's actually in relative terms, in terms of the population. So I'm always working with that specific population and looking for the outliers. When you use a bell curve statistics and you apply to that to those results, you have the mean and you have the standard deviations. Then you look for 2 standard deviations to the right, for instance, and you are able to find the outliers in that population. So the objective is not to analyze people's profile individually, but to look in a sample for those who could be a problem. If you have 100 people, but you can only serve 50, why not serve the least risky 50 instead of going for the 10 who will be riskier for you? And if you get those 10 in your 50, they become 20% of your portfolio. So that is
Right. So you're taking me back a little bit here to university. First of all, to my statistics course that I took once upon a time. So I'll post editing here. We'll add up a little image on here just to show people a bell curve graph and just to highlight a little bit of what a standard deviation means. But in quick terms, two standard deviations would mean that somebody is kind of well outside the normal range. They're an outlier, they're an anomaly, and in your case would kind of indicate a red flag, as it were. Now, I think something that'd be useful just for like context here is to understand, I guess, I want to say that like severity of this in terms of like, because some people might be thinking, okay, you said if somebody is irresponsible, right? Okay, irresponsible can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? If somebody is, one day late paying a parking ticket, for example, I mean, somebody could say that's irresponsible. Or if somebody hasn't paid child support in 5 years, right? That could be very irresponsible. And so I'm just curious, can you give some context in terms of like if you're trying to identify people that are irresponsible as one example, like how bad does it have to get before somebody gets flagged? Like is that something that you can answer or it just comes back to where they fit on the bell curve?
answer, Arthur. And it's important to understand that I am not trying to look at the individual and see how irresponsible he is or he is not. I'm
Right.
assessing several characteristics. And you probably ask me, how am I going to do this? Which is very interesting to explain. But I'll be looking for several characteristics. And when I put them together, I'll come to a score. And in that population, who are the people who are scoring much higher than everybody else? Who are the top 5% in terms of riskiness, or top 10%? When I look not only at responsibility, but also impulsivity and lack of commitment and lack of empathy or whatever that I am looking at to come up with my score. So there is not a threshold of irresponsibility that will make this person go over the
Right.
threshold. It will depend on the population. For instance, when I first developed my model, I tested it in my alma mater, which is the top engineering school in Brazil. It's like the MIT of Brazil. It's the
Right.
Aeronautics Institute of Technology. And of course, the average there was very low. Let's say from 0 to 100, the average in terms of risk was 20. And then you had some people who were 55, 60, and they were the outliers when we consider the standard deviations and the bell curve. But
Right.
those in the general population, they would probably be right on the average or
Right.
even lower than the average. So those people, they would not qualify as outliers given the broader population. So that's
Got it.
very important to see. We are not in any way expecting to come up with a profile of people based on what we are going to do. We are just saying, okay, that's your customer base. All right, I can help you find who are the 10% that are riskier. And maybe you'd like to focus on the other 90. This is a data point that we are providing the institutions. Another information they can use in their portfolio of alternatives to manage this.
Got it. So I do find that very interesting what you said there. Again, you're comparing people against the average of the population, right? Which does take a lot of the, let's say, judgment out of it in terms of an individual's personal judgment on what irresponsible is. And what I mean by that, and I don't know why I keep going to this parking ticket example, it seems to be on my mind for some reason, but I don't have a car. I don't know why. If on average for a population, the average was everybody pays their parking ticket 7 days late, and this individual paid their parking ticket 1 day late, they would actually be less irresponsible than the average in the population. They would actually look better than other.
And that's a guardrail because we are using AI to do this. And there are several things that we are not supposed to do when we are using AI. And one of
Right.
them is make decisions about people. So we are making decisions about people because the decision will be made by the institution when they are deciding to whom they are giving credit. This is
Right.
just another data point, and it's a data point based on that sample. It's not universal, it's not absolute, it is relative to that population.
Got it. So what I'm curious about, because I mean this idea of doing an integrity risk assessment, it's not a new thing. Banks have been doing it forever. Insurance companies have been doing it forever. What is it that's about the current system that's not working well enough? And then where do you come in and say, hey, we got a better solution here?
Scalability is one of the aspects.
Sorry, did you say scalability?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can do this for more people faster.
Yes, the thing is, banks do have processes. No, they call it know your customer.
Okay.
Exactly. In my previous life, I was the compliance officer, risk manager of an American bank here in São Paulo many, many years ago. I established the compliance unit of the bank. So everything's like tying together. All my experiences are kind of tying together in my startup. But it is not based on behavioral characteristics or behavioral assessment. Know your customer is more like checking available information in terms of like financial data, like those credit bureaus that can get you information on how if people pay their tickets late.
Yeah.
Or
Pay their credit card bills on time, or at least pay the minimum.
yeah, utilities. So it's all financial. It is not behavioral and psychological. At the moment, there is no one who is offering a scalable way of assessing the behavior from a psychological point of view, let's say. They infer based on other sources of information that they can get from bureaus and credit cards and so on, but not related to how people behave in terms of values or in terms of impulsivity or other personal characteristics.
Okay. So are you suggesting there? So let's say somebody has a, really good credit score, right? They pay their credit card bills on time, they have loans, they pay them, they pay their utilities, everything's good. If I'm a microcrediting loan company here, that there may still be other factors kind of hidden below that I can't see, that I should still actually be concerned about. And maybe this helps too if we change the example beyond just banking, because financing can be a little black and white. It's like you pay your bills, you don't pay your bills. But I know you're also talking as well about like HR. And so then we're talking about, hiring somebody to work in a company. Just checking. Can you still hear me okay? Seem to be fine here too. I was talking and then your image froze and I paused and now we're back.
Same here.
So my question, I'll just repeat my question because I'm not sure where I got cut off. But it sounded to me like you were suggesting somebody has like the old school assessment was based largely, like if you're a financial institution, the assessment was based largely on your historical financial records, like your credit score, right? So if somebody was really good at paying their credit cards on time, they pay their loans, they manage their utilities, they pay their phone bill, everything's good. Are there still risk factors bubbling underneath the surface that for me as a microfinance loan company, I still need to be concerned about, that would make me say, okay, even though they've been paying their bills historically, I still don't trust this person for, for a bigger loan. But I was also going to ask, just to reframe the question a little bit, because I think one issue with finance is maybe it's a little too black and white, right? You pay your bills, you don't pay your bills. But if we're talking an example of, because you were talking about HR and hiring employees, and that's, as much more kind of long-term interpersonal, people working together, that always gets complicated. And so take us through then how your assessment kind of gives that deeper understanding that just looking at a credit score maybe doesn't.
Let me give you just an example. When there is a microfinance institution, which is the one I started working with in a pilot, they say that when they are lending money in the city where they are located, they have one default rate, one fraud rate. And then when they go to the next town, the only difference is that they don't know the people personally. And then
Okay.
the fraud rate grows a lot more.
Goes
And
up.
so
Okay.
yes, and so does the default rate. So that shows that this one aspect, not knowing the people, plays a role in that risk that they find just by starting to do operations in a city nearby. But in addition to that, if everything were fine, we would not have $1 billion of loss only in Brazil related to fraud in banks.
That sounds like a lot.
1 out of 5 insurance claims being a fraud.
1 in 5. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a lot.
Yes. So I'm not talking about the people you already do business with, and you can see they are responsible and they pay their bills and all that. I'm talking about the newcomers. I'm talking about when you're doing the onboarding of a large group of people. You have very little information about, because when you consider that technology makes it possible for people to open bank accounts just using their cell phone, their mobiles, you have very little contact with your client. And technology makes this even more so. And there is no way you can assess people by their, integrity or their behavior, because everything you have is like data coming from financial institutions or credit bureaus, or in the microfinance example that I gave you, you do not know the people personally, and then the fraud goes up a lot just because of that.
Right.
That's an
Right.
example.
Okay. So that was a very interesting example there in terms of the importance of that personal connection and being able to know the individual. And as things become more, let's say, anonymized, right? As we live in bigger and bigger cities, right? Like, my banker doesn't know me personally, right? It's not like we go and play golf every once in a while, but that the importance of having these tools to kind of give that broader assessment. Now, one thing I think everybody's very curious about is, and if you can share a little bit of the secret sauce here, but in terms of, and if this is all confidential, please, we don't have to get into it, but it's like, how is the AI doing this assessment of people? Like what data is it working off of? How are you able to put these profiles together?
Yes. When I started working with assessments, I started first doing psychological assessments of multinational executives from British multinationals here in Brazil. And those psychological assessments, they take into account psychometric tests and interviews that are very psychoanalytical. So the sessions were almost like a psychoanalysis session.
Okay, like going to see a therapist almost?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So after 2 hours with this very in-depth conversation about childhood and parents and all that, plus psychometric tests, I would come out and write a 10, 20 pages report and recommend or not the hiring of a CEO for a multinational here in Brazil. That was my work when I was working for a British consulting firm that was specialized in psychological assessment.
Okay.
Then, 5 years ago, I started to work with another consulting firm doing behavioral assessment, which is very different from psychological assessment. And behavioral assessment is very much based on language.
Okay.
So your focus is on what the person said. I have no information about their childhood. I have no information about their parents. I have very little, not even psychometric tests. It's like just some idea of some managerial characteristics, but very little knowledge about the person's psychology. All I infer about a person is based on what he or she said. If there were no words, there was no behavior. Or a lack of words would lead me to infer certain behaviors. So I was working doing this when AI came into being, and I started to experiment because it's a machine to analyze language.
Yeah, that is something it does very well. Yes.
I am analyzing language, and they just made a machine that analyzes language. There must be something here that we can do together. And that's how the idea started. So my assessment tool is based on voice messages that people answer tailored questions. And those voice messages are then transcribed and analyzed, given parameters that I give to the LLM to analyze. And then I apply statistics and I come to the result. So it's a very simple method, very easy to understand, and amazingly accurate. And I started doing this in January 2023. I started to experiment with this. And just now in September, I saw the first scientific paper talking about the same thing, saying that words tell us a lot more about a person's personality than we could imagine.
Interesting.
They even propose that instead of applying psychological tests, you know, those tests that you have to answer that you prefer this and that.
Like the personality.
Like MBTI or Hogan, or there are a number of them, where you keep answering those questions. They keep pushing you until you have to decide between things that are just undecidable to get to some of your traits, usually based in the Big Five framework, which is also flawed. There has been some studies saying that doesn't really make any sense, and I don't really find it logic in that Big Five model. Anyway,
right.
Just to say that what we have today is very cumbersome, not practical, lengthy, and not even accurate. So we are replacing all that with a 2-minute voice message. But the important thing is, I'm not using a 2-minute voice message to tell you who you are. I'm just using that 2-minute voice message to say that in that population, you are one of the outliers or not.
Right.
That's important to make clear.
Okay, so that was good clarification. So in this case, it sounds like the user, the participant, right? They are aware that they are being assessed. They're going through this process. They're answering a specific question for you and providing a voice note. What I wasn't sure about is in terms of like, because I've heard of other people like using AI to like scrape the web and scrape social media profiles, and so I wasn't sure if this was something that's kind of going on like behind the scenes that people aren't aware of, but it sounds like in this case anyway, it's very specific. They know they're being assessed. They're answering your questions.
And you know, they are not being assessed in the psychological term of what an assessment is. We are just looking for the riskiest profiles, and we are flagging them.
Right.
The bank may decide, okay, I want to work with this risky individual because he will make a lot of money. Fine.
For sure.
Is that in that population, it's one of the riskiest that you have. That's all.
For sure. Yeah, I know the banks and insurance companies, they work in risk, and there's a price for everything, right? So it could also be that the bank says, okay, they're riskier. We're just let's charge them more interest. So there's kind of a balancing mechanism there. It's not necessarily black and white of, okay, we're not gonna work with them.
In recruiting, there are banks that do look for profiles that show strong psychopathic traits.
Okay, can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, you know, they may want to know who are the ones who have the riskiest profile because they want to hire those.
Oh, they want risk takers.
Yeah. There is a bank that chooses high-level executives based on their psychopathic traits.
Right.
At least that's an anecdotal that we hear in the market.
Got it. Okay. And for anybody who's not familiar, can we just talk a little bit about what those psychopathic traits are? I think people hear the word psychopath and it's
Yeah, that's a very long, very, how to say, length subject if I start talking about it, because
uh,
I've written 2 books about psychopaths. What I can tell you is that there are at least 4 disciplines that deal with human behavior. You have psychology, psychiatry, neuroscience, and each has a definition of what psychopath is. So my first book is precisely trying to reconcile all those 4 disciplines and say, look, psychology says this, psychiatry says this, neuroscience says this, psychoanalysis, but at the end, the common denominator, there is a common denominator, and this is the common denominator. So that's what my book is about. So if you ask me what is a psychopath, I can tell you that the common denominator of a psychopath is lack of empathy. There is a type that is more impulsive. There is a type that is more manipulative, that is a lot more planning. But all of them have a huge disregard for the other person. They see the other human being as an object to be used for their own very selfish objectives, which are usually related to money and power.
right.
If I had to say in a nutshell, those are people moved by money and power and pleasure, and who have very little concern for the other person and have difficulty to have positive emotions related to those people or to life in general.
Right. And so they become dangerous in how they use, manipulate, take advantage of other people, discard other people when they're
He lives of exploiting other people. That's the main modus operandi. So it's not really a relationship from which you can take something positive by relating to those people.
Got it.
They look just like us. There is nothing that you can say, oh, this person looks like a psychopath. No, you can't say that because they look like just everybody else.
Right. So there's no visual identifiers.
Even when you are talking to the person in a cocktail party, you are not able to say anything about it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious just to wind the clock back a little bit, because I feel like, to me, again, what you're doing here, background in computer science, but you've also done psychology, studying psychopaths, written 2 books on that, and now you've got this new business to do these integrity assessments. How did you get here? Like, can we just wind the clock back a little bit and just share a little bit about your story in terms of how you got here? Because I feel like you've had a, let's say, unusual, non-standard life. I'm just curious if you can share a little bit about your journey.
Okay, I'm going to be 60 this year, so it's a long journey.
Congratulations.
Well, I fell in love with math and physics when I was 14. That's how it all started. So I wanted to be a physicist. And then I went to the US and I did a year in high school there. And because I had already been admitted in university in Brazil in physics when I was 17, going to my exchange year. So there I just studied what I liked. And what I liked was physics, maths, psychology. I was curious to have class in psychology. And then they started this new computer science class in school. That was 1984. And they had a computer science class. Maybe I think Steve Jobs had just created his first PC. And my high school had those PCs. So I had the computer science class, and it was fun. It was like, like playing a game. So I'm saying this because I was talking to a friend another day, and he told me that his mother, who is a mathematician, but also with degrees in education, that she told him that everything we learn we've learned by the age of 17. And I'm like, wow, that was interesting that I was exposed to those things by the age of 17. Anyway, I got back, I went to study physics, and then there was this MIT in Brazil, the Aeronautics Institute of Technology, that only accepted boys there. It was forbidden for women.
Right.
And when I first heard about it, I was 14. I said, well, I'm going to study there. And this classmate told me, no, you can't. You are a girl. It's only for boys. And I'm like, really? So I think they have a problem because I'm going to study there. But I
Very,
forgot.
very, very defiant.
Yeah. But I forgot about it because I wanted to be a physicist and they did not have physics. They only had engineering there. But anyway, I was going to take another exam for physics in São Paulo to change university, because here you have to pass a competitive entry exam to be admitted, and I wanted to change universities.
Okay.
So going to take this exam, and then I saw this little ad saying that school had one course that admitted women, a new computer science course. I'm like, really? So I'm going to take this exam. And I just took it without any preparation or anything. And I passed. So that's why I studied computer science. I had no intention to work with computer science because I loved physics, but I could not say no to that specific school. And I'm very glad I studied it. And I graduated in the 80s in computer science. That weren't even companies that would hire people in this field, because this school is from the aeronautics. So it was mainly if I wanted to work for the Air Force or one of those companies that field, more or less. But I went into banking, and I was working in banking, and I thought it was completely meaningless. After all, I want to be a physicist. And so I was like, what am I doing here? And I thought, okay, if I have to work in banks, at least it should be in the World Bank, because they do something positive to the world. And that was the reason why I went to do an MBA abroad, because I thought I have to do something abroad so they can see me. And I went to INSEAD in France, and I did my MBA there. And the World Bank went there and hired me. So I went to work in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. for 4 years. And that's where I started to do microfinance project. And I worked in this project that opened the first microfinance institution of Mozambique in Africa.
In Mozambique, okay.
Yeah, I was very happy to be working with microfinance. And after 4 years in the World Bank, I thought I needed something a bit more dynamic, because I had always been a very dynamic person, and I thought the World Bank was a bit too quiet for me.
Little too formal?
Yes, maybe bureaucratic and slow and this kind of thing. So I decided to leave and to try something completely different. I didn't know what it was. I just knew to do something very different from everything I had done before. And at the same time, there was this opening at INSEAD for a director of careers for the MBAs. So I went back to France, and I was this deputy director of careers dealing with the MBAs, but mainly doing business development for the school, bringing recruiters in finance, in international organizations and technology to recruit the MBAs. But because the MBAs wanted to talk to me, they wanted my advice, they wanted to talk about their careers, I started to give coaching sessions to them. And I really love to do that.
Sorry, did you say coaching sessions?
Yes.
Okay. So students felt a certain connection to you. They felt like they could talk to you, they could open up, they could.
They wanted some guidance on their careers,
Right.
and coaching at that time was not something so widespread, so common.
Okay.
There wasn't this option on campus, and I was a former student. I had a career in banking and in the World Bank, so they wanted to talk to me, and I started to give coaching sessions. So they would sign up to come and talk to me, and then I decided every Wednesday I would just give coaching. And I love to do that. And because of that, I went to do a training in coaching in London.
Okay.
And I realized that in France, most coaches also had a training in neuro-linguistic programming. Have you heard of NLP?
NLP, I have, yes.
So I did an NLP certificate in Paris.
Okay.
And NLP, so that was the first time I was studying anything outside of finance and math and physics and computer science. That was the first time I was studying about human beings.
Right, right. And I would say it's an interesting, so for a little bit of context, Tony Robbins is big on the NLP space, right?
Exactly.
And I don't profess to be an expert in it, but it's about using language and words to speak to the subconscious mind to help to retrain it, rewire it, to be able to overcome blocks or problems in your life, to live a better, happier, healthier life. So one NLP technique that comes to mind is anchoring, which is the idea of, let's say you're having a conversation about, let's say it's a salary negotiation. So anchoring would be if I'm the employee and I'm trying to negotiate for a higher salary, right? Anchor by putting out a really high salary to kind of anchor the price, and then maybe we negotiate a little bit down from that, right? Because by using that anchor, it kind of sets a starting point that everybody can use. And sorry, there's one more thing I was going to say, and now I've lost my train of thought on that one. But what I was going to say is that for me, like physics, mathematician, right, NLP, those are two very different worlds. And I'm curious, actually, did people from your, let's say your background, when they started hearing that you were learning NLP, did they think that you'd gone crazy, that you'd lost your mind? Because those are generally not in the same room together.
But you see, neuro-linguistic programming. There we are again about talking about programming and language. So it's all related in a way. And I always had a lot of curiosity with regards to this kind of field. Even before I went to INSEAD, I had done an NLP workshop here in Brazil. And actually, the objectives that I wrote down using this NLP technique, one of them is that I would be working for the World Bank in 5 years, and it happened exactly 5 years later.
There we go.
So it's really amazing how it really influences your subconscious, because our minds are programmed by language. It's all language,
Agreed.
So in the NLP training, they say, look, here you will learn how, but you will not learn why. We do not discuss why people are. Yeah, we just tell you how to achieve what you want to achieve based on the techniques that we have discovered that work. And I was like, okay, but I want to know why.
Ooh, want to go deeper.
And then I said, okay, when I go back to Brazil, I will study PC something. And then I knew nothing about this world of C. So I said, it's going to be PC something. I don't know what. And then I came back to Brazil after 2 years there, and I met a person in a party who mentioned that he was studying psychoanalysis. And I was like, okay, and what is your undergrad? Oh, I'm a psychologist. Okay, so it's because you are a psychologist, then you are studying psychoanalysis. He said, no, anybody can study psychoanalysis. I said, no way. Yeah, sure. So I enrolled the next day in the psychoanalysis course, and I studied psychoanalysis for 5 years. After those 5 years, I decided I wanted to work with that. And that's when I quit my job at Cunha, which is a management consulting firm.
Okay.
And I want to work with this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but that's what I want to work. But I didn't want to be a psychoanalyst myself. I had already finished my 5 years training. Mm-hmm. I wanted to use it in this world of business.
Right. So you wanted to, like, you didn't want to be sitting there in to be a psychologist and working with people one on one, but you're saying, hey, I've learned these skills around psychology. I also have this background in computer science. I also have this background working at banks. I also have this background, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, how can I combine all of these skills together and use it from a technological point of view?
Then a headhunter found me because they were looking for a person here in Brazil to work for this consulting firm in London, doing the psychological assessment of C-level executives in British multinationals in Brazil. And that's what I did for 2 years, and I loved it. It's like, that's the assessment I told you, that it's like a psychoanalytical session
Right.
about the child, the parents, and trying to understand what that person is made of, plus psychometric tests. It was really it's like a detective work. And by the end, I would write a report and recommend hiring or not hiring that. During that time, I decided that I needed more theoretical training because psychoanalysis is very interesting. Freud was a genius, but he made up from thin air all those things.
Right. There wasn't a scientific rigor to kind of back it up.
That was very much outside of my scientific background, a bit too much. So the consulting firm that I was working for, it had been founded by 2 PhDs in psychology from Oxford. They had a very robust theoretical base, and I was trained in London by them on how to do those assessments. And I wanted to learn more about it. And then I did this exercise with myself. I was like, okay, if Freud were alive today, what would he study? And the answer was very easy. He would study neuroscience because he was a scientist. He was a neurologist. But at the time when he was dealing with those inexplicable symptoms, the only tool he had to work with were myths and language. There were no machines to observe the brain. So I thought, wow, he would be a neuroscientist, obviously. He would not be a psychoanalyst at all. Never, even though he invented it.
Right. To do it over, he might have taken a slightly different life path.
Sorry?
Given the chance to do it over, he might have taken a slightly different life path.
If he were alive today, he would not believe in psychoanalysis. He would be a neuroscientist. He would not have invented psychoanalysis because there would be other ways of trying to understand human behavior,
right,
human psychology. So that's why I went to do a post-graduation in neuroscience and applied psychology, which was a 2-year training in a university. And I had to write a final paper to graduate. And I decided to focus on the neuroscience of psychopathy, on the brain of the psychopath. How does it work? What makes it different? And that's how, after I finished, I decided to write a book because I had learned in psychoanalysis many different theories about this. And then in neuroscience and psychology and the work I was doing with this psychological assessment, they were each had a different way of describing the same phenomenon. And I'm like, okay, I'm writing this to myself just to keep track of what I've learned and make sense of what I've learned.
Right.
And that was my first book on psychopaths that I wrote in 2017.
Okay. So what I find fascinating about your story is the number of it's not a linear journey, right? You didn't just decide at a young age, okay, I'm going to do this one thing and then ride that career out for the rest of your life, which is what a lot of people do. Maybe there's a little bit of a transition here and there, but you've really jumped around from very, very different, not just like skill sets, but entire like academic departments, as it were, really, really jumping between all of them. And I'm actually curious for whether you have any, say, advice for somebody who's, they're younger, they're a student, maybe they're in high school, maybe they're in university. Actually, you mentioned you did some career coaching, but in terms of for people that are trying to figure out their life and they're like, all right, I don't exactly know, what it is that I want to do. would you recommend people just go like try different things? What would be your advice?
It's getting harder and harder to give advices because AI is changing everything. But one thing I would say is stay curious. Do follow your curiosity because it's going to take you to a place where you are intrinsically motivated. And when you are motivated, you can do something with it. You can discover new things. Like I've written books. I never wanted to write any book, but I felt like I needed to write because it was missing. It was a book I'd like to have read and it didn't exist.
Mm,
So I wrote the first one, and then the second one is about female psychopath. And there was nothing about female psychopath. The common sense was that not many women are psychopaths. Actually, it's something more related to men. And I was like, wait a minute. No, 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 no. We are just looking at we're just measuring them with the wrong rule. We are not using the correct way of assessing them. That's why we think they don't exist. So
okay, so there's different for female psychopathy. There's
like
different characteristics, different traits, but
that's
they're still there.
but it's all related to the same group of people, which we call cluster B. It's just that we are looking for things that we will not find in women. They will manifest it in a different way. Because when they started to study psychopath, they were interviewing male prisoners that were in jail because they had committed crimes, usually violent crimes.
Right.
Women they do harm in a different way. It's more subtle. It's more psychological.
More
It's
psychological.
it's more, in the background. So we have to learn how to see them. And that's what going back to my advice. So stay curious and go after the things that you really want to learn about because it may turn out into something that will be useful. For instance, I was not hoping or expecting to start a startup now, but
Hmm.
I just discovered something that I think is useful and that doesn't exist. And then background in computer science, so I'm able to I'm programming again. I am doing my model. I am changing and improving my own AI model. Fascinating because um, it's all there, it's all connected. And then I'm using this in microfinance, and I did a project in microfinance in Mozambique, 20 years ago. I never thought I would do that again. And now I am involved with this again. So I think that's what is fascinating. Just explore, explore, explore. And then one day you will put all of that together.
I love those projects that do finally bring all those different life skills together, right? And it kind of gives it a nice package, if you will, that again, all the different things that you've been learning, studying, it's all been building up to what's the expression? The whole is more than the sum of its parts, right? That then this what you've then done is you've created something new by learning a little bit of different things, bringing it all together and saying, "Hey, we've got something new here, and this solves a real problem." I'm reminded of there's a story of Steve Jobs of Apple and how back in university, he took like calligraphy courses, right? Which is the study of like really fancy handwriting, right? And everybody thought he was crazy. It's like, what are you gonna do with calligraphy? You're never gonna start a calligraphy business. This is a waste of time. Then later, when he was developing Apple, right, and he wanted it to have a more human feel, he was able to then take those calligraphy skills and then put it into Apple to give them really interesting fonts, right? That made it that humanized it, that made it more interesting, right? And so again, that's just one of those examples of like, random life skill, but then you plug it in a new way, and suddenly it creates this whole new meaning. And so I'm also a big believer in trying different things, experimenting, learning different things, because you never quite know where it's going to lead you to. So I really do appreciate you sharing your story on.
It's not only curiosity, but it's also discipline, and do go in depth into what you are studying. Do not just learn a little bit, learn a lot.
Learn a lot.
And
Well,
do not care of what other people are doing and what they think about what you are doing. It's none of their businesses. And you don't even know what you are doing, but you're just doing because that's what you feel like doing at that moment.
hmm
Maybe to come to something, maybe to what, doesn't matter. It's the journey. So yeah, that's what I
yeah. Stay curious, keep exploring, keep experimenting. Thais, I know we're almost at time here. Where can um where can people find out more about you?
I have my Substack where I publish my books, both in Portuguese and English.
Okay.
So people can go there. And I also publish articles there. And I also write about my hobby, which is astrology, that I have been studying for more than 30 years now. So they can find me there and also on LinkedIn.
Okay. And do you have a website too for your assessment business?
Yes, assessmentlabs.
Perfect. We will share a link to that below down in the show notes so people can check you out, can find you. Hey, before we wrap up here today, any last thoughts that you'd like to share? Anything else that people should know either about you or about your business?
No, I was just telling you before that this is like stepping out of my comfort zone, because one of the things I always wanted, like a goal in my life, was to never become known or famous.
Okay.
Some people have as a goal to become famous. And then I thought, well, but if I want to sell my books, people have to know I exist.
hmm
They will never know about my book. So this is really stepping out of my comfort zone, and it's great. Things that are not natural to do.
Well, you've done an absolute fantastic job here today. It's been a pleasure having you on. One thing that that last comment just triggered for me though is have you heard of the concept of 1,000 true fans?
No, never.
Okay, I wish I could credit who created it, but their name is eluding me right now. The concept. So you mentioned this idea of being of fame, right? Of being famous to sell your book, and I think one of the misnomers with fame, like when people think of fame, it's kind of binary. It's like you're either a famous superstar like you're Brad Pitt, or like you're nobody, and there's nothing kind of in between. I love the concept of 1,000 true fans because it speaks to the idea that if you're a if you're a business owner, if you're an artist, right? If you're, whatever it is that you're doing, you don't necessarily need to have 10 million people that know about you. That at the end of the day, if you have about 1,000 people who actually know you well, they like you, they trust you, they've heard your story, they've gotten to know you. It only takes a couple of people to have a small following to have enough people in your life to then turn that into something. And that really helped to reframe things for me, because I'm also not like, I don't want to be super famous. It just seems exhausting to me to, every time I walk out my door, people know, like, I don't want that. But to have just enough level of, and fame's probably not the right word, but just the right level of people, knowing about me, hearing my story, etc. And so anyway, just want to share that thought with you that, this isn't about being a rock star, but it's about having those few people that do know you, that do genuinely care about you in the best way. That's really, at least that's what I feel like I'm striving for. And I feel like that's probably in line too with your personality and what you're looking for here.
A useful concept. Yeah. And when I mean famous, I just mean known enough for people to buy my book.
hmm Yeah, exactly.
I've always been very private. So my only social media is LinkedIn. And then I have my Substack, because people were asking me to read my articles about astrology. And I said, okay, fine, I will start a Substack. And then I published my books there as well.
Well, Look, I know you said this was a big step outside of your comfort zone today, but you did absolutely fantastic. It was a real treat, a real pleasure to have you join us here today and to share your story about your life, what you've been through, the different transitions along the way, how you've grown, and that's all led up to this point now where you have assessment labs to run these risk integrity assessments.
Thank you.
So thank you, Thais, for joining us here today. And any last thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think that was my last one.
Fantastic. All right, let me
Thank you.
thank you so much. Until next time.